All right. So let's go over here. We've got our full screen. All right. Shavua Tov. It is good to see so many of you back, and some, I don't know if you've come for some of the earlier ones, but if you've missed them, please check out the YouTube recordings. It's not as good as being here in person, but as it's the past, that's all we've got to offer. So we are coming to our third and final section of the Understanding God series. And as I said at the outset, this was not intended to be the definitive A to Z. If you come to these 3 one-hour sessions, you'll understand everything about God. This is meant to provide a foundation for helping you to continue to develop your own understanding and spiritual connection to God in the next level. That is to say, moving it a bit further than wherever you may have already been. It's particularly important that you take what we have learned so far and begin to notice the phrasing within Torah, within the rest of Tanakh, the Bible, as well as within our prayers, and within the performance of our mitzvot, of the connection that goes back and forth. Right, so just keeping some of the things in mind that we have gone over so far will help make the actions of Judaism and the words of our sages and our tradition more meaningful and more spiritually powerful. Hopefully, especially after today's last section, because we're coming to the thorniest issue. That remains for putting together this foundation of understanding God in a more complicated way. And that is the idea of God as an actor, of God as acting within the world. This was one of the major schisms in the ancient world between Jewish philosophy and Jewish sages and the secular philosophers, most notably Aristotle and his followers, who were all well and fine with the notion of God as a creator, with the notion that God had made a universe with certain rules and certain principles and set everything in motion. But once that initial push was given, the universe was just sort of ticking over according to the rules forever and ever and ever. And Judaism said, well, but we don't believe that God has disappeared into the past. We believe that God is still present. And we have to try and figure out what that means. So that's the thorny issue we're going to be coming through, and it's going to have a lot of thorns that go with it. Let's see if this works. All right. So we're going to be covering, as we have in the last couple sessions as well, the problems with what is often understood implicitly as a literal model, a literal understanding of what it means when we say God acts in the world. And we're going to look at some of the reasons why a superficial understanding of God involved in the world is not a good idea. Many of us might think, I think that God is still involved in the world. God still acts in the world. So why am I worried about this? I'm done. Let's go. We're going to show you that it doesn't really work quite like that. How then can God act in the world? If it doesn't work according to the literal model or the superficial model, how does it work? And then we're going to have to balance out perhaps the biggest issue, which is God's action and our free will. And then finally, why do we bother learning all of this at all? What is the benefit of this different level and different style of understanding? Everyone got the agenda down? Excellent. All right, so it's very important to remember from Act 1, Scene 1, God impacts the world in meaningful ways. Notice of the verb, right? Present tense verb. God impacts the world in meaningful ways. This is in such big letters because this is not in question. What is in question is how this happens. What do we mean by this? Because there are very easy ways to think of what that might mean, but it's not how the picture books show. Does anyone recognize that picture? Or have people not been down to Florida Hospital as often as I have? Right, so if you've been down to Florida Hospital, you will notice that they have this beautiful portrait painting, whatever you want to call it. It's about that big on their wall. And it really kind of epitomizes, I would like to believe metaphorically in the mind of the artist, but literally in the minds of many who see it, what many of us instinctually think it means when we say God acts in the world. Of course, being a Seventh-day Adventist, their image of God is a rather particular image, not one that we share. But the metaphor still is one with a change of character that is familiar to many people instinctually. And it goes something like this. God really likes some people. So he decides to do special favors for them. He breaks natural laws, directs history, and does miracles, similar to how I act in the world, only with more power, only with more oomph. Right? God is the ultimate powerful sorcerer, genie, whatever you want to take. But the reason why this image is so good, and despite the difference of character, why I'm still using it, is because you get a very good image of this right here with the notion of there is a hand moving this hand, right? It's the hand with the hand. And that's what's happening, right? As the surgeon goes to make a cut, there is a hand that is unseen moving the cut. And if you're on the right side of God, then that cut's going to be good. And if you're on the wrong side, then God's going to jog the hand and things are going to be bad. But it's a almost physical, tangible action that is taking place. And there are problems with this. We've talked about some of them already with the idea of God not being corporeal, God having no physical form. We've talked also about the difficulty of thinking of God as being me plus superpowers. But above and beyond that, or alongside of it, we have the issue of what is called theodicy. Theodicy is the fancy way of saying, why do bad things happen to good people? Right? And it's based upon a certain logical structure. God is all-powerful. We all agree to this, yes? God is all-knowing. We all agree to this, yes? God is only good. We all agree to this. If you agree to the first three, then the fact that there is still evil in the world, or at least suffering, seems to be a problem. Right? If I was the all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good Superman, I could get rid of all evil. Right? I mean, that's what all-powerful means. And all-knowing means I would know about every act of evil, and all-good would mean I would care about every act of evil. Therefore, all evil would be gone. What do we know? If I, me, Rabbi Neely, if I had the superpowers of being omnipotent, of being omniscient, and being omnibeneficent, that's the fancy way of saying all good, of course I would do it. Who here would allow evil to continue if you were able to stop it? Right? Through no risk to yourself, through no expenditure of your own resources, you're all powerful after all, and through no worry or fear that you don't understand what's going on and that you might make a mistake. Who wouldn't use their infinite superpowers to change the world to only be good?
Because he provided free will.
Well, we're going to come back to the free will question a little bit further on, but that's going to be something that will help us understand this. But I want you to make sure that you understand the problem if you believe the literal view, if you view the hand being guided, literally, physically, in order for something good to happen, or not guided and allowing something bad to happen, or guided so something bad happens, God forbid, you run up against this very real problem, right? Because no moral creature of infinite power and of infinite knowledge and of infinite good wouldn't remove evil from the world. We're going to find out that, yes, there is a way that we're going to get God out of this, but you can't get God out of this problem if you make God just Superman with ultimate X-ray vision and superpowers. If you keep the literal model as your model of God's action, this is the inevitable problem that you will face. You will also face version 2 of theodicy. God is all-powerful, God is all-knowing, God is only good. So does that mean that this world is exactly how God wants it to be? Warts and all. Well, let's, maybe not even go down the evil road, but is this it? Right? God has infinite choice, and this is the world God wants it to be. With back pains and indigestion and the tsetse fly and all sorts of other things, malaria, and this is a bit of an issue. This is explained very, very beautifully in a an essay by Mark Twain, if you are ever interested in hearing it expressed just bitingly sharp. If you believe in the three and the literal version of what it means that God acts in the world, which is, again, Superman plus, it becomes problematic. Because how can we say this is the best of all possible worlds? Those of you who are Leibniz fans will recognize this quote. If you've also read Voltaire's Candide, you'll know that this is the phrase that was lampooned by Professor Pangloss. How can we say this is the best of all possible worlds when we look around and we don't always see things being so best? Because if you meet those first three conditions and your understanding of God, and you believe in the literal, superficial model of God's action, it's hard to rescue God from being really quite immoral in this view. And free will comes back as a problem as well. If God is all powerful and all knowing, and God is only good, how can I then make choices if God is running the show? Right? If God is all powerful, where's there room for me? We're going to come back to answers. I'm not actually looking for answers from the crowd right now. We're going to work our way through the answers, because to get you some understanding of this takes systematic building. So unlike other classes I do, where lots of different ideas are welcome all throughout, right now, just hold on. All right. So Act 2, this is where we try to get to a better way of understanding. And again, I do not promise that you will walk away here with no more questions. I just hope your new questions will be better than your old ones. God acts through the power of creation. All that has been and will be was established 14 billion years ago, more or less. This is a big solution for much of what we're going to need to understand God acting in the world. How can the fact that we're going back to creation, remember, as we discussed it 2 weeks ago, be a solution? Well, as Rambam tries to put it, all parts of the universe are produced through angels. That may sound great, right? Angels are everywhere. For natural forces and angels are identical. Again, this is Rambam 1,000 years ago. Natural forces and angels are identical. Gravity, that's an angel. Right? Electromagnetism, that's an angel. Thermodynamics, that's an angel. And that's not the 20th, 1st century saying that. That's the 11th and 12th century saying that. How bad and dangerous is the blindness of ignorance, says Rambam. Say to a person that the Almighty sends an angel into the womb to form the fetus, and he will believe it. And even find a description of the greatness of God's might and wisdom. Even though, at the same time, this person also believes that the angel consists of burning fire and is as big as a third of the part of the universe. Right? In Rambam's time, he would talk to people who had not studied, and they would say, oh, well, angels are these fiery creatures. Right? This is before, remember, the Renaissance painters turned them into fluffy little cherubim on clouds. But these angels are fiery, terrible, consuming beasts. Oh, but they also go into the womb and they make babies and shape the fetus into the forms and legs and arms and all. And he's like, how can you believe that? How can you not only believe that, but you believe somehow you are making God out to be better because you believe this? That your piety and the irrationality of this is somehow a benefit. It is a great blessing to God. That you believe in God's greatness and God's miracles so much that you're willing to believe the impossible. Somehow you take pride in this, and you think God would as well. But tell him that God gave the seed a formative power. Again, this is 1,000 years ago, Rambam is writing. That produces and shapes the limbs, and that this power is called angel. And he will turn away, because he cannot comprehend the true greatness and power of creating forces that act in a body without being perceived by our senses. I call it an angel, fiery burning beast, and all of a sudden God is great. Call it a force that was dictated from the time the creation began, that is working out God's wonders as it was planned to do so, but no fire and, beastie thing. And all of a sudden, you've diminished God in the eyes of what Rambam calls the ignorant. And he's saying, It's the opposite. This is a much greater testimony to God's greatness than any fiery angel would ever be. Creating a universe from which galaxies and DNA flow from the same initial fabric and a set of instructions is a greater testimony to God than God acting as the all-powerful Superman Plus, who is constantly manipulating the matter and reality in order to make it what it is every single instant. Right? Any old person who's omnipotent and omniscient can try and keep up with reality. But imagine trying to plan all of reality from the very first moment to get everything balanced exactly right so that all would come to pass as it was supposed to. We're going to come back to the present part of that, but you have to keep in mind the eternity of the plan and the 14 billion year old action which makes the present possible. Right? In the same way, as the universes and DNA come out, you can imagine the 10 Commandments, the whole of Torah, all of Judaism as being embedded within the reality under the earth, that is to say, embedded within the stone, there from the time the world began and from before. Is it more impressive to do it the Charlton Heston way with a fiery bolt of lightning coming down and creating the 10 Commandments out of the stone? Or is it more impressive to say God, from the moment the Big Bang happened, had planned that eventually there would be a planet called Earth and a place called Sinai, and within the geological structure, there would be embedded within the stone that would only be exposed at just the right moment when Moses himself was up there for 40 days. We like the special effects, I know. We like the special effects, but just think for a moment about what it means for God's planning of the universe in order to make something come to be at just the right moment. From Pirkei Avot, 10 things were created at twilight. The mouth of the earth, for Korach, this is the earth opening up that swallowed Korach. The mouth of the well, this is the water that was with us in the wilderness. The mouth of the donkey, for Bilam, or against Bilam, depending upon how you want to read that story. That's the talking donkey. The rainbow, this is the rainbow after the flood, and Noah. The manna, the food that sustained us. The staff, this is Moses' staff, and Aaron's staff, depending upon how you want to read it, which transformed in the conflict with Pharaoh and his magician and did all the miracles. The shamir, this is, according to rabbinic tradition, a special worm-like creature that could cut through stone, which allowed the temple to be built. And the writing, meaning writing had to come from somewhere, the inscription, and the tablets. And that's referring to the particular way that the actual 10 Commandment tablets were written. But notice what Pirkei Avot, what the Mishnah is saying. When were these things made? Twilight. Twilight of what? Creation, right? Before the seventh day began. The very, very end of the sixth day, when everything else in the world had been made, right before the sun went down completely and the stars came out and Shabbos was first for the real Shabbos, God quickly did 10 more things. But none of these 10 things were used for thousands of years. But what are the rabbis saying by this? They're saying that God embedded within the world certain things that we, when we read the Torah or Tanakh, seem to be deviations from natural law, from the flow of the world. And they're saying, no, these are not deviations. These were formed as the world was formed. It's just they didn't have their moment on stage until much, much later. Once again, Rambam tries to explain it well. The universe continues its regular course. The miracles also natural. Again, we're talking 1,000 years ago. This is not some modern liberal rubbish. When God created the universe with its present physical properties, he made it part of these properties that they should produce certain miracles at certain times. When God decided how water would be wet, and how gravity would make it flow, and how the moon would affect the tides, and all of those things that go into making what happens in our natural world happen, He made sure that there would be a certain convergence of events and those properties which would create a miracle at a certain time. And the sign of a prophet consisted in the fact that God told him to declare when a thing will take place. Is the prophet making the miracle happen through some power? No. God has already told the prophet the thing is going to happen. And the prophet is simply declaring it, and the prophet knows why? Because as we discussed last week, because the prophet knows God. Right? It's not that God is telling, again, it is the prophet drawing from this infinite well. And the true prophet is able to draw true understanding of what tomorrow, next week, or 100 years from now holds. Because it's already been embedded within the fabric of the world, which was made at the moment of creation. The thing itself was affected according to the fixed laws of nature. This testifies to the greatness of the author, that should be a capital A, and shows that he held it to be impossible that there should be a change in the laws of nature. God does not want the laws of nature constantly changing. We're going to come back to why in a little while, but please hold on to that. And God does not want a change in the will of God after they have been established. Again, remember we talked in the very first session that the notion of God having choices, you know, at any given moment in time, God has to choose A or B, right? Pepsi or Coke, implies that there is some possibility for error in God's choice. Because if there's no possibility of error, then there's no choice, right? If Coke is always better than Pepsi, then God will always choose Coke, and therefore there is no choice. But if God is choosing to do a miracle or not choosing to do a miracle, if we go back to our literal model at the very beginning with the picture of a hand guiding the surgeon, if God is choosing to guide that surgeon correctly or choosing not to guide correctly, so that the patient either lives or dies, then that means God is sitting there going, I wonder what I should do today. Life or death? Let me think. Which means that God doesn't know for some period of time whether life or death should be the solution. God doesn't know whether he's going to do a miracle or not. But God is all-knowing. Instead, God knows, and God has already planned it, and it is already scheduled to happen. Where was I? God gave the waters, this is talking about the parting of the sea. God gave the waters the property of joining together and of flowing in a downward direction and of separating, only at the time when the Egyptians were drowned, and only in a particular place. Which leads us to the wonderful question, if Moses, sorry about the word wrap, if Moses hadn't been standing there, would the waters have still parted? Right? If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one, if God wants a miracle to happen, but the person the miracle is supposed to happen didn't show up, does the miracle still happen? Right? If God encoded within the fabric of reality that the waters would part at just the right time, what would have happened if Moses had been early? Or if Moses had been late? It's impossible. And it's impossible that Moses would have been early or that Moses wouldn't have been late, or that Moses would have been late. Moses arrived at exactly the moment that God knew Moses would arrive. And God knew that Moses would arrive, and therefore God made sure to embed within the fundamental properties of water that at that particular moment, the water would move in such a way, and again, you can either go the Hollywood version with the towering walls of water, or you can go for a more natural version of an opportune wind and tide that created a marsh that we could go across, but the Egyptian chariots could not. Take your pick of the spectrum. Either way, it happened at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way that we were able to be out of Egypt. And that was planned from the moment of the Big Bang. How are we doing so far? Because we still have a problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot you have to accept.
There's a lot you have to accept. The part of it we have to accept is, okay, so why Moses? Why did it happen then? Why didn't it happen 50 years early? Why did it happen 50 years later? But what role then, if Moses was just showing up at the moment this miracle was scheduled to happen, does that mean that there was nothing that could be done to change whether it happened or not? Could Moses not have blown it? What if Moses had really decided that he kind of enjoyed being the prince of Egypt? And when he went out and he saw the Hebrew slave being beaten up and almost killed, he didn't step forward and defend him. What if Moses had said, well, you know, he's a slave, he deserves it, and went back into the palace? 80 years later, there would have been a big water party and then water closing, and no one would have been standing there. And this is saying no, because prayer and merit can still alter creation after creation began, because they already did. This is where we get into going back to our understanding of God outside of time, not riding along in time with us. Right? Remember our picture way back in the first discussion? Right? In the beginning, and then there was a bunch of stuff, and now there's us, and then at the end of time, there's the end of time. God is not along for the trip. Right? God is not on the train with us, going through all the stations of years. If it helps you to imagine it, and it's only a metaphor, don't go too far with it. God is up in the plane, watching the train and the track, and God can see every stop along the way, and God knows everything that is happening along the way. Which means as we make our choices, God is already at the beginning of time creating the required particulars of creation to correspond with what we do at the end, or in the middle, I should say. Our actions, our merits help God author the universe. And they already did.
Isn't that predestination?
Because it's still our choice. And we're going to get to that free will in a minute, because that's really going to be the crux of trying to understand all of this. Because how do we understand all of this and still have free choice? And the way that the short answer, we're going to go for the long answer in a minute, but I don't want you to be squirming too long in the meantime. The short answer is, for us, it is not predetermination, because we are making those choices. But from God's point of view, he has already seen us make that choice. And he has already decided what the response will be. Right? What's that?
That's predestination.
That sounds so like predestination. But
If it looks like it does.
it looks like a duck, if it acts like a duck. A metaphor, again, you can only take metaphors so far, but a metaphor nonetheless can be good. If I put out an apple and a candy bar in front of my son, I know which one he's going to pick. My daughter, I'd be a little bit more doubtful, but my son, I know which one he'll pick. Right? He's going to go for the candy bar. So if I have decided that if he goes for the candy bar, that he will not get to stay up and watch TV, which, by the way, would be a horribly unfair test. But let's imagine that I was a horribly unfair father. I'm sure at times my kids think I am. Let's imagine that I was. And I set up this test, candy bar, apple, and he doesn't know it, but I know it, that if he picks the candy bar, he's not getting any more TV. Does he still choose? Is it still his choice? Right? Did I take him and say, you must pick the candy bar? Did I only put the candy bar in front of him? Or did I give him a choice, even knowing what he would choose?
But you didn't do it. And I'm not. Omnipotent power did it.
So we're going to have to come back to this idea that God
That's what I'm saying.
has made room for free choice. And that's going to be the most important thing I hope that you walk away with here tonight, and how that balances out and what it means for, well, everything. Okay, so you're asking exactly the right question, but we've got to get some more material before we can get to maybe an agreement on this. So when we conduct our lives according to Torah, we become part of the correct flow of creation, which is then written into the fabric of the world from the beginning. Right? You're living a life of Torah, you're living a life of mitzvot, you're living a life of godliness. Pick whichever term you like. Good. You are flowing with the nature of the universe as God wants it to be. Remember, that is the ultimate state that God is seeking. That's why we can ascertain that through revelation, because it is built into the fabric of the universe itself. So I'm trucking along and I'm doing the right things. I am with the flow of creation. Nice. My actions and the results are being written in the beginning based upon what I'm doing now. So what about conscious prayer? We pray a lot in Judaism, and our prayers may often sound like praise, and they may often sound like self-reflection, which they are meant to be as well, but our prayers often sound like we're asking for stuff, like we want the world to be different than it currently is. Well, there are opportunities for prayer to work, and there are limits for prayer to work, and we're going to explore them both. So from Brachot in the Mishnah, one who prays retroactively, it is a prayer in vain. What is an example of a retroactive prayer? If one is pregnant and said, may it be God's will that it be a boy, that is a prayer in vain. Tfilat Shah. You're already pregnant. Whether it's a boy or a girl has already been decided. To pray that it be a boy when it is already one or the other is not an acceptable prayer, according to Jewish law. Right? Not just it's not a good idea, you should not pray like that. If one is entering town and hears the sound of screaming and says, may it be God's will that it's not from my family, that is a prayer in vain. It's not saying there's anything wrong with loving your family or hoping your family is safe, but if there was already screaming, that scream, by the time it reached your ear, came from a person. And that person either was or wasn't a member of your family. Praying that it not be a member of your family after the scream has already emanated doesn't work. And it represents a profound misunderstanding of what prayer is supposed to be and what miracles are. Remember, we just discussed, miracles are not changing the laws of nature, they are the fulfillment of the laws of nature built in from the beginning. And since something has already happened, it's not going to unhappen. Another example. May it be your will, Lord my God, that you send a blessing upon this pile of wheat. And while measuring the process, you can say, blessed is the one who sends blessing to this pile. Right, so before I count my wheat, and while I am going through it, I can ask for a blessing upon the wheat. If one were to measure first and then pray, his prayer would be considered a prayer in vain, since blessing is to be found only in that which remains hidden from the eye. All right, let me just make sure we understand this visually. Praying for a good harvest here, good idea. Praying for a good harvest once it's already a 5-pound bag doesn't work. Right? Yes? No. Yes? No. And you're laughing, but we pray that 5 pounds not really be 5 pounds all the time. Many of us in our mind most pray that 5 pounds not be 5 pounds. But what the Mishnah is trying to say, and then Shulchan Aruch, when it puts it into the Jewish law, is saying that you can't pray that reality be different than it is. You can pray it will be different, but you can't pray that it is different, because what is has already happened. Right? It is in the realm of the human eye. It has been seen, it has been measured, it has been known. If it is known by us, it can't be unknown. For it to be unknown, you would have to fundamentally alter the laws of nature. And as we just said, God doesn't do that. The miracles happen in the way that nature unfolds, not in the re-unfolding of nature after the fact because we didn't like what just happened. Which means that praying for tomorrow is a great idea. Praying for yesterday isn't. Working for tomorrow is a good idea. Working for yesterday isn't. Does that make sense? Okay? Okay. One should not pray for anything that is not a natural occurrence. Even though the Holy One, blessed be He, is fully capable, right? God can design the world in order to make the water do what it does. It is forbidden to pray that God perform a supernatural miracle, such as that a tree should bear fruit before its proper time. Oh God, I know I just planted the seed, but I'm really hungry right now and I'd like a peach. So in the next 5 minutes, if you could make this tree grow and produce a peach, I would be eternally grateful. Yours sincerely, Rabbi Joshua Neely. And P.S. did I mention I'm a rabbi? No. This is commentary, by the way, on the Shulchan Aruch we just read about how you make a blessing for the wheat. You don't pray that the supernatural occur for your benefit.
Didn't Joshua pray for the sun to stand still so he could fight?
Did Joshua pray for the sun to stand still, or did Joshua know that would be the moment when the sun would stand still? Because of his knowledge of God. Right? Joshua knew it would be the auspicious time to do what he did because he knew God so well. And by know, remember, we're not just talking about he knows God's favorite color. It means he understood the essence of God. Bijan, did you have your hand?
Yeah. By knowing this, the way you described that the future of the world is embedded in the fabric of the universe from the creation.
Correct.
Okay. By knowing this, how come we or the rabbi do not like to talk about the prophecies that other people such as Yechezkel or Shmuel or Daniel told that this going to happen, that's going to happen? How come we don't talk about it?
So it's not so much that the rabbis, the sages don't like to talk about it, it's that they don't like to think that they understand it enough to be able to make accurate predictions. Right? Prophecy is a very slippery beast, as we talked about last week. That it is extremely hard for someone other than the prophet to understand what the vision of the prophet was. We can make guesses. When the prophet says, don't murder, we were pretty sure what that means. When it says that there will be destruction coming from the north, we are pretty sure that we understand what that is going to look like, but that doesn't mean that the average person, even in the days of Isaiah, when such a prophecy was being given, would be able to say, he must mean Babylon. And that means that now, in our own day, when we look towards the end of times in many of the prophecies in Ezekiel's and others, we know what the general shape will be, but we can't give GPS coordinates for Gog. We can't say we know for sure today we have begun phase 1, or maybe it's going to be 100 years from now, or 200 years from now. The calculation is what is difficult. So to understand and see what is implied for our own action, yes. But to believe that we can lay out a map, the prophecy doesn't grant us that ability.
Are you going to talk about why some prayers were successful and some aren't?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. All right. So the first thing I wanted to make sure that we understood about why some prayers are successful and some prayers aren't is a lot of the prayers that we make are for things that have already happened. And that is going to be unsuccessful from square one. I wish my dog was a cat. Right? If that's your prayer, I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't so hot. If you mean right now, I wish it wasn't so hot, not I hope the weather's better tomorrow, but right now I wish the temperature would suddenly be different, that's not going to happen. I wish I had a different job. You wish that right now, as you sit at your desk and don't enjoy what you're doing, that God would wave his magic God wand and suddenly you'd be in a different job? That's not how the world works. I wish he wasn't sick. Right now, I want all illness from this person gone. Is the same type of prayer, if that's what you are thinking for now, an immediate transformation, or as is more often said, I wish they hadn't gotten sick. It is equivalent, although morally something very commendable, but it is equivalent theologically to saying, I wish my dog was a cat. Because you are asking that the present undergoes some radical supernatural transformation so that what is isn't, or so that what isn't is. I wish there was no war. Right now, you want God to wave his God wand and all war stops. All the bullets no longer work. Right? All the bombs stop going boom. They just sit there. That's not a proper prayer. I wish she didn't die. As an expression of regret and of pain and of mourning, absolutely, Judaism says yes. as a prayer? No, it doesn't work as a prayer. We're going to have to hold on. So when do we call out to God? We can't call out for things that have already happened or to ask that God supernaturally change the immediate present into a different immediate present. And yet we have people throughout all of the Bible calling out to God, sounding like they're expecting God to do something, right? In my distress, I called out to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him to his ears. Psalms 18. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. That should be very familiar from the Exodus story. The cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin exceedingly grievous. Do not take advantage of the widow or the fatherless. If you do and they cry out to me, that should be a capital me, I will certainly hear their cry. My anger will be aroused, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows and your children fatherless. And as we say in Ashrei 3 times a day, the Lord is near to all them that call upon him, to all that call upon him in truth. As that last part, that's going to be very operative. So the first thing we need to remember is that, as we learned from Brachot and from Shulchan Aruch, there has to be an opening for God to act. Right? Once you've counted the wheat and put it into a sack and labeled it 5 pounds, there's no opening for God to act. There needs to be room for God to act, and there needs to be a willingness to let God act, which is going to come in when we talk about free will more. Which is why crying out to God is a symbol of our willingness and our eagerness for God to intervene. Because generally the default position is 100% it's all in our laps. When we cry out, we're saying, it's too much, I need help. And if there is room for help, and we're going to see it's up against some pretty big ifs, then it is possible. But our analysis of that if and God's analysis of that if are going to be very, very different. So let's break it down. In a perfect world of perfect people who made perfect choices, our prayers and hopes would be constantly met. And most of what we call evil would vanish. Right? That is our basic foundation. Right? If everybody was perfect and everybody was making right choices all the time, then yes, what we pray for would be what was passing and coming to be. Again, correct prayers about the future, not about the past or the immediate present. One of the reasons why this is true is because if we were perfect people who made perfect choices all the time, then what we pray for would already be what God wants the world to be. So we wouldn't be miraculously changing the world into something else. The world would have already become that something else because we were perfect and we made perfect choices. Right? It's easy to pray for good temperatures if you have a good air conditioning unit, because you already said it, and you get what you said. But we're not perfect, and we don't always make perfect choices, and evil is a little bit more persistent for that. And the children of Israel wept and said, "Would that we were given meat to eat." Anyone know this story? Anyone like quails?
Yeah.
What's that? Tired of the manna. Tired of the manna, and they wanted meat. Well, a second ago, one more second, the Israelites were groaning about slavery, and God sends Moses and 10 plagues and leads us out with signs and wonders. So why didn't we get a nice delivery of meat instead of the punishment of the quail jammed down our throats until it came out of our nostrils? All right, it's, pretty graphic. We called out here, right? We called out there. What could possibly be the difference? God has to balance the goal of the universe with natural law and with free will. You think your job is hard? Try doing this calculation sometimes. You have to try and get the universe to a particular goal as expeditiously as possible, given the laws that were necessary for it to be constructed in the first place in order to reach that goal, and the free will necessary that was embedded within humanity in order that we could reach that goal. Because without the natural law and without free will, the goal doesn't happen. Right? The world is a place where a soul can be transformed through choice. It needs consistent laws to make informed choices, and it needs choice itself, or else it cannot be transformed. Fundamental principle of why God bothered to make the universe. Because only here can the soul do what the soul can do. Only here can the soul be transformed by choice. And that only works if there is consistent natural laws in order that you can make consistent choices. Right? If every time I pick up a gun and I pull the trigger, a different thing happens. Sometimes a bullet flies out, sometimes people suddenly come back from the dead, suddenly it turns into a petunia. If natural laws are not reliable and dependable, if the impossible, as we take it, can happen at any time, if there is no cause and effect, if there are no laws that can be understood by the rational application of our mind, then how can you ever be said to be responsible for your choices? Today I decided to have brunch, and I died. Why? Because today brunch was deadly. But tomorrow brunch could actually make me win the lottery. And the next day brunch may make the sun explode. Why? Because there is no cause and effect. Or there is no cause and effect that our human minds can understand. Instead, God made the universe so that there would be cause and effect, so that the natural laws would not be ruptured constantly, in order that we can then be held accountable for the choices we make. How many of us give slack to our children when they're very, very little because they don't really know any better? You know, a toddler knocks over a vase. You say, oh, don't worry, sweetie. I'm sorry, I should have moved it. You didn't understand that it was fragile or whatever. You didn't realize what you were doing. You know, the ball got away from you because you don't understand how balls work. How many of you, if your 20-year-old knocked over that same vase in the same stupid way, would be so forgiving? No, because by that point, they know how the world works. But if the ball did something different every single time it got bounced, the difference between a 2-year-old and a 20-year-old would be zero. Because how could a 20-year-old know any better if they can never know what's going to happen? And you can't know what's going to happen if you can't depend on it happening the way it happened before, once you understand the rules. And those rules we call natural law. Right? If gravity doesn't always work the same way, you're pretty much never going to be able to control your life and your decisions. And you need to have choice. Because otherwise, all the most consistent laws in the universe would give you still no growth. Right? So the purpose. God, in a pure expression of God's will, creates an angel. Right? Angels are, according to our tradition, a pure, undisturbed, and unambiguous emanation of God's will. And again, will is not just God wants. Will means the essence of God. The nature of God reflected in some particular emanation. Think of them like the shadows on the bottom of a pool that are made from the ripples and the waves above. It's a glance of right there, for that moment I could recognize that God was present in that action. That's what we call an angel. It's a pure, unambiguous reflection of God's will. And it cannot be material. Because God is immaterial. So what did God do? God made a world. God made a material place. And he said, I'm going to try something different. I'm not going to just sit here in the eternity of nothing, and the eternity of no time. I'm going to create a world. And again, I'm making this as a narrative. It's not as though God sat down with his pipe and had this decision. I'm going to create a world that is made up of stuff. But I'm going to make this stuff in a particular way so that there will be humans, or creatures of any description you like. I'm not making claims here about aliens, right? Of humans that will have a soul. I will put within them a spark of my essence. It won't be my essence, because my essence cannot be made truly material. But that essence will have choice. That soul in the material will be able to choose. Angels can't choose. Angels don't get to decide, yes, I'm going to follow what God wants me to do, or no, I'm going to not. Which is one of the fallacies of the whole fallen angel myth from some other faiths. Angels don't get to choose. They are programmed lockstep to be in line with God's will. But God wanted to see, and he knows how it works, not that he was waiting for the experiment, but God wanted to see whether we, as material creatures, could make the soul into something special that an angel can't. Because an angel can't choose, he wanted to see whether we would rise to accept God's will rather than be born from it. Rather than being controlled by it, we would choose to follow it. And in so doing, our soul would become something unique, something distinct from an angel. And we would rise towards God rather than only emanating downwards. But in order for that to work, we have to be material and we have to have choice. And that makes problems, right? By form and function, the world cannot always be as we wish it to be. But that doesn't make it or God evil. For ignorant man believes that the whole universe only exists for him, as if nothing else required any consideration. And by the way, if this sounds like something you might hear about people talking about millennials nowadays, it's 1,000 years old. We're not the first people to think that the next generation doesn't understand. And just like in Rambam's time, it's not only the younger generation that doesn't get it, oftentimes we don't get it either. If, therefore, anything happens to him, contrary to his expectation, he at once concludes that the whole universe is evil. Right? Oh, man, I didn't get tickets to go to the concert. Why did this always happen to me? Stupid world, why are people always making life terrible for me? The whole world is over because I didn't get what I want. If he would consider the whole universe and comprehend what a small portion he is of the universe, he will find the truth. Because you didn't get what you want, the whole universe is wrong. Because it didn't go your way, or at least the way you thought it should. That, really? The billions of light years of the rest of the universe that are moving in perfect harmony, and you didn't get what you wanted, no matter how important it may have seemed to you, that means the whole universe is wrong and godless? Wow, what conceit. Mark Twain. Report from the recording angel, which, if you have never read the full version, go home, Google it, enjoy it. This is a bureaucratic letter back to a human, as though the heavens above were a giant bureaucracy, and the human had sent in a petition, what we call prayer, and the angel is reporting back on the validity or the granting of these prayers. Prayer for influx of laborers to reduce wages 10%. Granted. Right? The guy prayed that more people would come into the town to work so that he could cut the wages of his current employers, because more labor means I don't have to pay you as much. Right? So he's praying that he is able to cut back on the wages of his employees, and heaven says, granted. Prayer for better times and plentier food for, quote, the hard-handed son of toil, whose patient and exhausting labors make comfortable the homes and pleasant the ways of the more fortunate, and entitle him to our vigilant and effective protection from the wrongs and injustices which grasping avarice would do him, and to the tender offices of our grateful hearts. Prayer meeting prayer. Refused. Conflicts with secret supplication of heart. See above. Right, which one are we really praying for? Right, this is, as he puts it, a prayer meeting prayer, meaning that you had a bunch of people around in your house, or you were in the church and you were sitting together and you were reading out from the script of prayer, which is that we should look with beneficence upon those that are less fortunate than us, and God should be moved to help them. And please, God, help them be better. But secretly in my heart, I'm saying, you know what, I hope more people come here so I can cut their wages. And then we complain when which? Which one did we really want? One prayer was granted, one prayer was refused. Right? Was God good? Was God bad? Right? That's the parody that Mark Twain is trying to make here. I don't know, secret supplications of heart, we often wish for what is wrong, or at least wrong for others, if not wrong for us. No matter what we may mouth in public, is our heart aligned truly? Not just with the public supplications, but is our heart aligned truly with what God wants for the world? And if it isn't, do we really have a ground to complain that our prayers, our real prayers, weren't answered? The foolishness of man perverts his way, and his heart frets against the Lord, from the book of Proverbs. Right, we rail against God, says the sages, because he doesn't do what we want. That's not God's fault. Because God is not there to do what we want. We are here to do what God wants. But let's be honest, even if we get rid of stupid prayers, there still seems to be an awful lot of evil if you look in the newspaper, if you still get a newspaper. How do we work around that? How do we understand it? How do we explain it with this notion of God, right? God is answering evil prayers? I mean, well, what are we doing here? All right, so evil number one. These are things that happen in the world that are evil, that we would like not to happen. They cause suffering, they cause pain. Why do this category of things happen though? Because if it can change, it can break. Basic law of nature. You can call it entropy, you can call it the laws of thermodynamics. Basically, if you are made of material stuff, which if you went back to our list of us as material going up towards God, we are built on material stuff breaks down. Why does it break? Because it can change. And if it couldn't change, we couldn't be us. Right? That's your price of admission. You want to live a physical life? You want to not be an angel? Then God has to make you out of something rather than nothing. And if you're made out of something, well, the laws of physics that are necessary for all the other workings of the universe to be accomplished say that you're going to break down. Because if stuff didn't break down, you wouldn't exist. Because after the instant of the Big Bang, whatever stuff had been made would still be now floating around 14 billion years unchanged. And if all that stuff in the beginning was floating around unchanged, it never would have changed into the stuff necessary to make you. So you want to live? You're going to be able to break your leg. And when you break your leg, don't complain that you could break your leg. You can complain that it happened. More about that in a minute. But don't complain that it could happen. Legs have to be breakable for you to be human. And to put it more succinctly, perhaps, some of the suffering in the world comes because everything is made from matter. Matter can change, but it will inevitably break. Material trouble, however, despite our appearances, especially where we may be on the age spectrum, is not so common that most people can't live mostly happy lives. Yes, we break legs. Is a broken leg really the end of the world? Yes, we have problems with kidneys and hearts and lungs and all sorts of other things. For most of our lives? Or could we have a life then? Most people, for most of their life, live in mostly good enough health that happiness is not impossible. If they couldn't, if they didn't, we would not have survived as a species. It's just basic biology. If we didn't mostly function well physically, we wouldn't continue to be around long enough to have more of us. We are, therefore, there may be problems with us being made out of material, but they are not insurmountable problems. None of you shall go out the door of his house until the morning. Angel of death is coming for the Exodus, the final plague. As Baba Kama says in the Talmud, once permission is given to the destructive angel to do his work, he does not distinguish between righteous and wicked. You're made of natural stuff. If a plague is going around, you don't pray, you get antibiotics. I remember, we're not perverting the natural course of things. We're not asking that it not have happened. You can ask that it not happen later, but right now, you are subject to the same laws as everyone else. Deal with it, says God. Don't expect your righteousness to be a shield. Evil number 2, the philosophy that many people have: do unto others before they do unto you. This is the category of evil that is done in the world by humans against other humans. Much of the suffering in the world comes because people freely choose to abuse other people. This is known as the jerk principle. This must be possible. That is to say, people must be allowed to be jerks, even if it hurts so deeply. The attacks of others, and this is hard to say in the modern time, but when you look at the span of human history, the attacks of others is still mostly bearable most of the time. Otherwise, again, we wouldn't be here. If war and rape and pillage and plunder was the norm, if that was what everyone did every day, we would have wiped ourselves out while we were still using stone spears. It hurts to think that it is required by the universe to allow people to be as evil as they choose to be. And it hurts equally to say, but we get over it. But it is true. If you want what's on the right, you have to allow the possibility of the left. If you want to be able to choose love, to choose goodness, to choose kindness and compassion and mercy, you also have to be able to choose to be evil and malicious and hateful and sadistic. If you can't choose to be on that left, then when you're on the right, that's no virtue. You accomplished nothing. If there is only one road open to you, all the virtues you have are meaningless. You have to be able to be in that camp if you want to be able to be praised and to grow spiritually for choosing not to be. And similarly, those who choose to do evil have to have had the choice of good and to have chosen to reject it, or else how can we condemn them? If they had no choice but to be evil, if that's just in their nature, then how can I be upset by what they did? It'd be like a tree falling on my house. Tree had no choice. It's just what happens when trees fall over. This is one of the most painful things to begin to accept. And it can only be accepted when we understand that through this choice, through this opportunity that God has given us, through this calling that God has given us, God has been screaming at us to which one to pick, and has been giving us signs and prophets and wonders, and built into our very essence of our spiritual quest, the right choice. It's like God handing us the answer key. But when people choose wrong, we can't blame God that the people chose wrong. We can blame the people that they chose wrong. I think for a moment you are sitting in your comfortable apartment, and next door you hear, "I can't believe you burnt the dinner again. Ah, ah, ah." Do you sit there and say, why doesn't someone do that? Why doesn't God strike that abuser down? Or do you pick up the phone and call the cops? And if you told your neighbor that, I couldn't believe God would let something like that happen without doing something, You think your neighbor is going to be sympathetic to your view of God as being callous? Or are you going to say, you know, you've got a phone. You could have done something. Don't blame God for people choosing to be evil. Blame people for choosing to be people. Which brings us to evil 3. Do unto yourself without really thinking of the consequences. More of the suffering in the world comes because people freely choose to abuse themselves by refusing to use revelation, reason, or self-control. If I drop an anvil on my foot because I was too stupid to get a hand truck to move it, did I say, God, break my foot? As Rambam says, the numerous evils to which individual persons are exposed are due to the defects existing in the persons themselves. We complain and seek relief from our own faults. We suffer from the evils with which we, by our own free will, inflict on ourselves and ascribe them to God, who is far from being connected with them. Right? You smoke yourself to lung cancer, you drink yourself to cirrhosis of the liver, and then you say, why did God do this to me? And it doesn't have to be that extreme. You have ignored your spouse, and he or she decides that maybe they would like to separate. God, why did you take the love of my life from me? God didn't take them from you. You did. You text while driving and you smash into a tree? Did God put the tree in front of you? Did God move your steering wheel? The soul can acquire a strong habit of desiring useless things. Especially true in our modern consumer world, but this was true even 1,000 years ago and more. This desire is without limit, although there are actually very few things which are necessary, right? You can want anything, but you only need a few things. But what is superfluous is without end. You want vessels of silver, but golden vessels are still better. Others even have vessels of sapphire or any other substance that could be suggested. Those who are ignorant and confused in their thoughts are constantly in trouble and pain because they cannot get as much of these things as a certain other person possesses. Sound familiar? Yes? They expose themselves to great dangers by voyage or service of kings. And by the way, Judaism has always said, be wary of working for kings. It doesn't usually work out well unless you're the king. But because people want more, because they think they need more, because they are envious of what other people have, that people will go to great lengths to get it. And it's not just about dangers and voyages and services of kings. It can be neglect of your health. It can be neglect of your family. It can be neglect of developing your own virtue and your spirit. Because you're pursuing what your soul has decided it wants rather than what it needs. And once you start that, it's very hard to stop. And when these people who are pursuing so adamantly these things they don't really need, meet with the consequences of the course which they adopt, they complain of the decrees and judgments of God. Why did my ship sink when I was on that voyage? They wonder at the lack of justice, but it has not given them great riches with which they could buy wine to get drunk, and concubines adorned with ornaments of gold and other things to drive themselves to lasciviousness beyond their capacities, as if the whole universe existed exclusively for the purpose of giving pleasure to these people. Why am I not rich? If I were rich, I could lounge around all day and have women and wine and anything I wanted. That's why you're not rich. Why would you think God should grant you that wish? Do you think you'd be better off with it? If that's what you're planning to do with such things? The error of the ignorant goes so far as to say that God's power is insufficient because he has given to this universe the properties which they imagine cause these great evils. Right? Why did God make it so that gold was so rare? If only gold was lying on the ground, then I could have plenty and be rich. Yeah. Go back to economics, supply and demand 101. And which do not help all evil disposed persons to obtain the evil which they seek and to bring their evil souls to the aim of their desires, though these, as we have shown, are really without limit. The virtuous and wise, however, see and comprehend the wisdom of God displayed in the universe. This isn't hard, this is not easy, even for those of us that don't consider ourselves to be evil souls, that are always lusting and going after more things than we could possibly want or that would be self-destructive. But it applies in smaller degree, but similar kind to all of us. Everyone in this room, to a lesser or greater extent, waste time. Now, you've all been very self-selective by choosing to spend your Sunday afternoon coming to Understand God classes. But even still, there is time in all of our lives when we pursue things which are not worthy of us, and which will, if allowed to complete their natural course of things, damage us. Relationships that will hurt us, business endeavors that are overreaching and which may be the ruin of us, or at least cause us a great shortfall. An extra 5 miles an hour on your speedometer to get someplace you don't even want to be a little faster. That extra cupcake. Over and over again, we make decisions which have as their natural, logical, inevitable conclusion our own harm. And to a lesser or greater degree, we all choose harm at least some of the time. And when it comes, we complain. I bitterly complain against my younger self for not exercising better. But God didn't make me a flabby 40-year-old. I did. And I can't complain that God made our bodies able to get flabby. Because if he didn't, well, then my body wouldn't be able to do all the other good things that, thank God, it still can do. Because it wouldn't be malleable, changeable. I couldn't grow, and not just sideways. How great are your works, O Adonai, your thoughts are very deep. A brutish man does not know, nor does a fool understand this. Though the wicked spring up like grass, and all the workers of iniquity flourish, they destroy themselves forever. Psalms 92, also known as Mizmoshi Le'yom HaShabbat, the psalm that inaugurates the beginning of Shabbat. At Shabbat, we are trying to comprehend eternity and creation. And this is the psalm that was chosen by our sages for us to focus. Yes, the first 3 lines focus on the singing of God and praise of God and the celebration with song and instruments. But immediately after it, it goes on to say, I may be celebrating, but I'm not so naive that I don't see that bad things are happening all around, that people are sprouting like grass and flourishing. But they don't understand why I'm singing despite them, because I can see that in the long run, they are on a self-destructive course. And in the long run, the goal of this universe will be met. It may not be in my lifetime, and my lifetime may be made worse in terms of its comfort and relative experience than if they were not doing that, or if touching the mic, or if I were not making the choices I make. But ultimately, the universe will win. It's just going to take as long as we let it. Just waiting for you to see it. Midvale School for the Gifted.
It happens.
He's never going to get through that door. Right? Is it the door's fault? Door says pull! And he's pushing with all his might. Gary Larson, by the way, is an undiluted genius. If you haven't read through all the Far Side collections, you must. Captures the human condition beautifully. I'm sure that kid is thinking, what's wrong with this door? And in this particular case, the kid even wants to go the right place. He wants to get into the school. But that's not how the door works. And that's not the door's fault. It is his fault, or the people who made the door's fault, or the world around him that raised him to not read signs in front of him, or pick any other explanation, that he should be opening it better. But the door is what the door is. And if he wants to get through it, he's going to have to figure out how to read the sign and learn how to pull. And no amount of complaining or banging or screaming is going to make that door move in if it's a pull door. Now, we still got a lot of evil left, right? Because is there no limit to humanity's free will? Can people be as evil really as they want to be and God will let them? Could we utterly destroy the course of the world and completely obliterate any chance for the great promise of this world to allow its soul to transform itself through free will and choice in order to reach for God rather than being just a carbon copy emanation from God? Isn't some suffering, no matter how humanly created, too evil to be allowed to resist? Aren't those the questions we wonder at night when we allow ourselves to wonder such things? Yeah, I'm not going to give you a good answer for this. Sorry. I'm going to give you some possible answers, but if you expect me to stand here and say, no, I can explain all of it, how it's all perfectly hunky-dory and it's okay, A, I would be lying, and B, it would be immoral because it would make it so that it felt like we were immune to human suffering. Just as Job eventually received an answer from the whirlwind which he could not completely comprehend, we're going to get a few answers that our tradition have provided which can help us analyze some catastrophes, but never will give us complete satisfaction until the world is finally redeemed. So the first and most obvious, and goes back to the door in the last picture, is we have already been given tools and instructions to avoid it. Right? Like the example of someone who sits in their apartment and listens to the person next door being beaten. You've already been given the moral code that tells you you don't sit by. You've already been given a phone that can be used, and you've already been given a police force, which means you don't even have to worry about physical harm to yourself. And you're complaining about what? When Katrina 10 years ago flooded New Orleans, was the flood just because of the hurricane, or was it because no one had listened to the engineers that were complaining about the works that had been used to protect a city that was built under the water level and that had been used to hem in a massive river, one of the biggest on earth, to prevent it from what it had been doing for a few 100,000 years? God flooded the city. God has given us technology to survive any hurricane. We don't always want to spend the money to use it, or we don't always want to live in places where we can avoid it. And so when we put ourselves in the path of a hurricane and build something substandard in a stupid way that will be flooded and is obviously known by any rational mind, which comprehends the natural laws that God has already shown us consistently will be applied in such and such a case, it's God's fault when it floods? Or worse, you have people saying it's God's punishment. It's not God's punishment, it's our own self-inflicted arrogance and lack of foresight. I guess you could call that a punishment, but it's certainly not for some other imagined sin. The other, which is really hard to hold on to, but is still often very true, is that within the boundaries of natural law and free choice, it could have been worse. Right? You get into an accident and you break your hip. Could have been worse. Right? God may have speared the person who was drinking and texting and doing whatever else in the car when they smashed into you, just enough to keep you from not being completely killed. But could God have avoided the accident entirely without removing the free choice of the other person or you? Or perhaps your broken hip was a small price to pay to keep that person from crashing into a school bus down the road. We don't know. Massive deviation from nature would have been needed to stop it. Again, back to Katrina. Spiraling away out there in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. We can either A, begin to evacuate everyone immediately and move in supplies and relief efforts to be immediately there on hand once the storm has passed, or B, we can hope that God is going to reach down and scoop up the hurricane and just throw it away. Do we really think that God's complete and utter annulment of the natural laws is going to be good for us in the long term, even if it might be convenient in the short term? How many levees are we going to build if we believe that God will take care of the hurricane? And again, going back to number one, why should God take care of the hurricane when he's already told us how to take care of it and given us the tools to do so? Right, someone walks into your house, go back to our vase and the 2-year-old and 20-year-old, and they smash the vase. And they say, well, you know, you really should have put bubble wrap around that. No, how about you show a little more care, a little more concern when you walk through my house? It's not my fault that I did not properly protect me from your own idiocy. Number 4 is perhaps the most common problem that we face. It would fundamentally override free will. Time and time again, the worst evils that we see are the evils of human choice. And to imagine that God will take away those choices is to take away the essence of what we are supposed to accomplish as a human in the first place. We have to be able to choose, and others have to be able to choose badly, or else choice doesn't exist. And God is doing the best he can, remember with that little triangle of balance, between the goal of allowing the human soul to elevate itself towards God through the material, through choice, through the natural laws, and through our free will. God is doing the best he can to steer us around the worst of the rocks, but sometimes we as a species or as individuals are just so determined to drive ourselves into the iceberg that God would have to reach over, grab the wheel, and steer for us. And once that happens, the trip's over. Once that happens, there's no point to having souls in the world that are given choice. Because if God is going to steer once, he's going to have to steer again and again and again, and every single moment becomes God directing us rather than us directing ourselves. And if God wanted angels, he wouldn't have bothered with all of this in the first place. And the last, which we'll never know, just as Job could never quite understand. This evil, this suffering, this pain was allowed, might have been allowed, because it was chosen, because of an eventual good that could not have been reached without it. How many people during World War II and World War I, just to use 2 very famous examples, were willing to storm the beaches, go over the trenches, drive their tanks into the teeth of enemy resistance, knowing that there was almost certainty that they would die? How many soldiers in the IDF in 48, 56, and 67, and on and on and on, go into the front line? Yes, thankfully winning, but knowing as they go into the front line, especially those that are first into the action, that there is a very good chance they will not be coming back. Why did they do it? Why would someone throw themselves on a grenade? Because they know that moment of pain and suffering and evil that they must endure creates a window in this world for good to follow. And that if they didn't, more would die, more would suffer, and evil would win. The Allies who volunteered or who were drafted and served with honor and dignity to stop the Nazi and Japanese war machines, they could have voted out the government that said, let's go to war. There were people who tried. They could have sat home, safe and secure in the United States. We would have developed a nuclear bomb and we would have been protected by our oceans. Hitler would have had Europe. There would have been 11 to 12 million Jews dead. Japan would have ruled over China and probably through to India as well. And the imperial war machine of Japan may not have been quite as systematic in its genocide and brutality as the Nazis, but it came pretty close. But we could have sat home. We didn't have to sacrifice a single American life. But that would have been worse than the tens of thousands who died to stop it. And imagine the billions who would have lived in terror and who would have suffered for the next 100 years or more under such a word. All right. God designed the world to reach its goal as quickly and as hard as it is to believe, painlessly as possible, given the limits of our free will and the laws of nature which must be preserved for that goal to be reached. Without choice, the goal is impossible. Without natural law, the goal is impossible. If God had wanted angels, there would be no need for the world at all. If God had wanted us to be beasts, he would not have made us in the divine image. If God had wanted us not to have rational choice and be responsible for our choices, but to simply live according to our biological impulses, he could have done that too. And the lion who kills the deer is not evil. The lion has no choice. He doesn't say, today I think I'm going to be mean and hunt a deer. He says, today I think I'm going to get dinner. And for me, dinner is deer. And when the deer doesn't turn around and kill the lion, we don't call him a noble martyr. We say the deer is being a deer. God did not want angels and God did not want animals. God created us in God's image so that we would be able to reach for God's image. And that hurts. By its nature, we are partners with God, and our choices hasten the perfection of the world. Our choices also open opportunities for God to have written miracles into creation and fulfilled through natural law. We are partners in God because every time we choose right, that affects the creation that God has already put in motion. Because God knew we would choose right, but we're still choosing it. I knew you would do that, and just to help you, I'm putting this your way. It's going to take 14 billion years to get there. It's faster than the Postal Service, but it's still going to get there. And within the limits of everyone else's free will in the world, and within the limits of the unintended consequences that can create more suffering for giving you what you want than you might possibly be able to imagine, I'm with you on this, says God. Choose good, and things will be better than if you choose wrong. It's not going to be the riches and wine, women, and song that you may think you want. It's not going to be a picnic or a cakewalk because we have natural laws to watch out for and we have free will to have to exercise. But it is better walking the path of Torah than not. And ultimately, it is better walking the path of Torah than not, because that's the purpose of our being created in the first place. And we're going all the way back to our discussion of God looked into the Torah to create the world. Our purpose is to use it to transform our souls through this material existence where we are blessed and cursed with free will so that we can do something that angels can't. We can choose to rise towards God. And the good thing is by our very existence, we know it eventually works. Because otherwise, God wouldn't have bothered. God knows how this world is going to turn out. God has told us through the prophets, as hard as it may be to always understand their words, we can understand clearly that the world eventually gets it right. It's what we call the Messianic age, the time of Mashiach. And it doesn't sound like, from the words of the prophets, it's going to be a cakewalk getting there. But the destination will be reached, or else we would not have begun the journey. Because God sees both ends at the same time. I already said that. So when we say we hope for the day when God is king, all the world, we are referring to an era when all the world acknowledges God as God and thus lives accordingly. It's what we mean in the Messianic age. It's what we mean in that last line of the Elainer. Vayom hahu, right? We're talking about God being king because we acknowledge God as king. Read the paragraph before that. Read the English or the Hebrew if you know Hebrew. And see what we're asking for before we say God is proclaimed as king. We're not asking for God's promotion. We're asking for it to be the pinnacle of our spiritual evolution. God becomes king when we reach God, not when God reaches down to us. You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and I am God, from Isaiah. That is, says the Midrash, when you are my witnesses, I am God. And when you are not my witnesses, I'm not God. Doesn't mean God is winking in and out of existence, depending upon our behavior. But we create pockets of godliness around us. We create opportunities for godliness. We become partners with God, creating a world that shows God when we choose to follow the path that God has given. And when we don't, when we choose evil, when we choose often to act worse than beasts, God might as well not exist. Because we are driving God out of the world by befouling it with our choices. How can you see God through that muck? Think of the pollution in Beijing. I don't know if you've been following news recently. They had a massive parade of their military might. And in order for them to get ready to the parade, they didn't just need to polish up all the missiles. They had to try and temporarily get rid of the pollution in Beijing so they'd have beautiful pictures of lovely blue sky, which is not normal in Beijing these days. But when the pollution is there and the sky is terrible, is the sky gone? Is the sky no longer blue? But it might as well not be there. You might as well say the sky is green or brown or all the other lovely colors of smog that I remember well from Los Angeles as well. When we do not act as the children of God should act, is the equivalent of pumping the smog into the air and blotting out the sky and the sun. It doesn't mean the sun and the sky go away, but from our point of view, God is no longer present because we have closed the door. And when we reverse it, better than fans and air scrubbers, we can clean the sky and bring God back in. This is not the best of all possible worlds. Sorry, Leibniz. I loved him as a philosopher, but he was wrong. And it's not the best of all possible worlds because we can do better. That is to say, right now, the world we live in is still messed up because we are still making bad choices and we're still dealing with the repercussions of the bad choices made by others in front of us, that is to say, in our past. But every right choice we make makes the world better. We can and we will, and from God's point of view, humanity as a whole already has achieved this. This is the best of all possible universes, however, because only within its limits can our purpose be achieved. So the world is not where it is supposed to be, but the universe is functioning exactly as it is supposed to be. Our problem is we're still not reading the sign on the door. Not just individually, internationally, globally, over and over again in 1,000 different ways. I'm not saying that everybody here has to take personal responsibility for every evil in the world, but we've all got to take some. And fixing it begins with fixing us. The reason why I did this entire series right now before Rosh Hashanah, which has been a nuisance in many ways, is precisely because understanding God helps us understand ourselves and our purpose and our importance in the universe and the importance of our choices. As we stand at the threshold of a new year, we should understand that it is in our power, indeed it is only in our power, to hasten the perfection of the world and the realization of its purpose. And it only happens by choosing to do right. Not by other people choosing to do right. They've got their part to play. By me choosing to do right. It's the only thing you truly have control over. That's the only thing God expects of you. Choose right. Questions? Hopefully lots. I don't know whether you got them all ready for today, but yes.
You said the world will be, maybe I have it wrong, will be made better or will, and yet in Minion we read where God said that take care of the world because there is no one after me to fix it.
Correct. So the world will be made perfect, and each one of us has to feel personally and ultimately responsible for that. Because we can't simply say, someone else will do it. Now, will there be more generations? Yes. But does that mean I'm off the hook? No, because in addition to perfecting the world, which I know has been the driving force for so much of Jewish activity over the last century, in addition to that, we are also perfecting ourselves. And that's not something we can ever pass off to someone else. Right? Your own spiritual progression, development, ennoblement, strengthening, pick your word of choice, is only from you. So yes, we may leave it, chas v'chalila, God forbid, to our great-great-great-grandchildren to take care of some of the major problems in our world that are all communal and joint. But my great-great-great-grandchildren cannot make my spirit better. I have that responsibility solely for myself. Yes?
So you're saying that the world has been waiting for this messianic time billions of years.
Yes.
But the Jews didn't come on the scene until fairly recently. So how do we get into this?
So just to make sure everyone can hear, if the world is aiming towards messianic time for at least 14 billion years, and we certainly hope it's not going to take another 14 billion to get to the other side, but let's say 14 billion years plus one, God willing, it's next year. For most of that time period, there were no humans, and for most of the time period there's been humans as a species, there haven't been Jews. And the best answer that I've heard for that, you don't move into a house before it's built. That is to say that as the world has developed and grown, that is the universe from its start, which needed all of its fundamental laws and properties to take proper shape, in order for there to begin the process of life, again, all pre-programmed from the beginning, in order for there to be a planet as unique as our own, in order for there to be a species as uniquely gifted as the human species, in order for there to be a spiritual awakening that would eventually reach this guy named Abraham, who still needed a few more generations before there could be a family that would follow together, that could also be a nation, then the world was ready for Torah. But it wasn't ready before that. Now, we can hypothesize, had all the way back at the beginning of time, you know, the very first caveman who awakened to the idea that there was more to life than chasing mammoth, that there was a spiritual dimension to the world. If that person had grasped supremely the concept of God the way Moses would eventually grasp, then perhaps, hypothetically, the Torah could have come 30,000 years ago rather than 3. But apparently, we weren't ready yet, or else it would have happened.
Okay, you said, I mean, you were like reading on one of the things on the screen about, well, why is, you know, how about there be no war or something like that? Well, God did stop the missiles from attacking Israel in 1967. He did at the very end. It actually happened.
So, as I said before, the acts that we know are miracles that are embedded within the Torah and Tanakh, we can say clearly, were written into the fabric of creation from the first moment, because of the choices of the people who were standing at that time. Right? Remember, time doesn't really matter one direction or the other when you're God. only matters for us. When it comes to the times since, the days of the Maccabees, the days of the Mishnah, the days of the Talmud, the days of the Middle Ages, and all the way up into the modern time, there have been numerous events and occurrences which are believed to be miracles. In fact, if you are coming to my Mishnah Brachot class, plug, in just a little while, we're going to be reading the chapters that deal with personal miracles. Judaism doesn't ask that everyone in the nation agree with an individual's interpretation of the event as a miracle, but it also doesn't say that miracles don't happen for individuals. Right? So we can't proclaim, like we can with the Torah, this is a miracle. But we can say, it felt like a miracle for me. And we can give thanks and we can give praise and we can continue to see in it that there are opportunities that can, from time to time, without our ability to predict or control, because of all of those issues we've discussed, for things to happen better than we would have expected. And we want to try and maximize those opportunities. But we don't wait for those opportunities. Right? We don't say, if God doesn't want people to be hungry, God will make food rain from the sky. We say God has already made food rain from the sky. We call it rain. And we know the plants grow. And we know how it works, and we know how to distribute it, and we know what it takes to make someone not have to starve to death. Let's do it. Right? That miracle has already happened. We can't complain when God doesn't make food pour out of the sky. But when food does come out of the sky, we can say, wow, that seems pretty special. We call that manna, by the way. Other questions for this evening? Yes.
More of a request for you and for Michael. I thought this was an excellent series, and I'd like to see more of it.
So the question / request is, can we do more of this? And the answer is, during the high holidays, you will have multiple days to do this, right? And I'm not being facetious. When you are sitting in shul, wondering what you're supposed to be doing, and you're reading through page after page of prayer, recognize that the people who wrote those prayers were thinking of this. They were not thinking of the cartoon version, the literal version, the caricature version. They were using metaphors that could be accessed from the youngest to the oldest, but they were expecting that you would continue to develop and see the clues, see the signs within our tradition of this truth, and use those signs within the prayers, use those reflections, those images, those metaphors to guide yourself for a better year. Right? Understanding God is not just a philosophical exercise. We are not philosophers, we're Jews. Understanding God is about transforming our soul and transforming our world. And the Yamim Noraim, the high holidays, are the pinnacle of when we undertake that endeavor. So you're going to get a bunch of days with a bunch of text, with even better quotes than the ones I've got here, but I knew you were coming up to them, so I wasn't going to use them. That will give you more opportunities to investigate and think about this. After the high holidays, absolutely, I would be happy to continue the discussion and presentations on subtopics or other sides. I wanted to give the 3 big points, which, by the way, as I mentioned at the very beginning, but in case you weren't there, are mentioned every single day in our morning and evening service with the prayers that we put around the Shema. As we proclaim God's oneness, we prepare ourselves by reminding ourselves God is creator, reminding ourselves of God as revealer, and after we have said the Shema, we remind ourselves of God as redeemer. That is not an accident that the service was created to do exactly that, and it isn't an accident that the Shema is where it is. So perhaps we could do a class on how this is reflected in the regular Siddur. We could do classes on how this is reflected in multiple mitzvot, and time again comes back to reinforce itself. But I'm always happy to entertain more questions and ideas, and if we can build a course and classes out of them, that's even better. All right, I'm sure that everyone has places to be and things to go do, because we know that's our job. Thank you very much for coming, especially on Labor Day weekend.